Okay, so just to get started with the education session, so let's start with our first presenter for today, Carleen Maitland from Penn State University. And she would be presenting this paper, The Creation of Capital Through an ICT-based Learning Program. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning. Today I want to share with you the results of our research on a program called MOOC Camp. There's been a lot of research on MOOCs lately, particularly taking advantage of the large amount of quantitative data. We didn't do that. So while everybody's zigging, we're zagging. So we did a qualitative study of low and middle income students' experiences in this MOOC Camp program. So one of the questions that MOOCs have raised is what can their role be in helping improve the educational systems in developing countries? Their massive and open nature have enabled many students to join these classes. Classes sometimes have as many as 40,000 students registered. Now, of course, not all of them finish, but we'll get to that. Some people see MOOCs as a potential equalizer in global education. This is Daphne Koller, one of the founders of Coursera, making such a statement in a TED Talk. Others are skeptical. They point out the important issues that broadband internet connectivity is not widely available in many places, which could make access to MOOCs difficult. They also point out the hypocrisy of universities offering these classes and having students put their heart and soul into completing them, those that do, and not offering credit. If we look at developing country issues aside, the experience of MOOCs shows that many MOOC students already have degrees, which then raises a question, why are they in there? What is their motivation? We also have the issue of low completion rates. There is a lot of research being done right now on trying to improve the completion rates, but I don't do that research because I have a different perspective. If we look at the reality, right, rather than the position of whether or not, from a theoretical perspective, MOOCs have value for students in developing countries, why not ask the students themselves? Look at their experiences and talk to them. That's our approach. So we find that research on the Coursera platform shows that a third of Coursera students are from the developing world. So despite challenges in broadband access, they're there. But why are they there? What are their motivations? This was something that we were very curious about. So we started this study, the very early stages of the study, by talking to students in a Penn State MOOC called Maps in the Geospatial Revolution. This was a GIS class, not something one would take lightly. And we talked to just 6 students from different countries about their experiences in the MOOC. Now, all of them were interested to some extent in the content, right, and in learning the content, but we also found that they had many other motivations. Some of them were just motivated by personal development, curiosity, not only of the content, but of the platform. Some of them were just bored and found the MOOC as entertaining. That, I had to say, surprised me because taking a technical class for fun is not really what I do for fun, so it was surprising. They also look at MOOCs as entertainment in some cases. And so for us, we start to see this maybe as a museum experience more than a classroom experience, an informal education opportunity available not to all, but to some. One of my favorite stories from that part of our study was a woman who was an engineer, a professional engineer, living away from home in another country where she was working, and she and her father decided to take this MOOC as a way to remain connected. So they would chat about the assignments and compete on test scores, and that was why they were in that MOOC. So this opened our eyes to the social and cultural aspects of the MOOC experience. And so we wanted to learn more about what these outcomes might be, which of course then led us to Pierre Bourdieu's work on social and cultural capital. Bourdieu's concept of cultural capital was developed from his work in the French school system, where he found that instead of enabling students to climb the socioeconomic ladder, the educational system simply replicated the existing social stratification. He later identified 3 forms of cultural capital: objectified, embodied, and institutionalized. We're primarily interested in the latter 2. Embodied cultural capital are cultural traits that an individual expresses and is developed over time, and its primary operationalization is through language. He also delineated institutionalized cultural capital, the qualifications bestowed on individuals, such as a university degree. So the basis of this work, being from educational systems and having a cultural component, was a very good fit for MOOC research. We are also interested in the social capital aspects of the MOOC experience. Bourdieu's construct of social capital has been very well researched, and also, as compared to cultural capital, has been more strongly tied to economic development. So here we were, interested in understanding the cultural and social aspects of the MOOC experience, but of course we needed to also have some aspect of the educational component as well. And as many researchers will recognize the important power of serendipity, we just happened to stumble into this program that is hosted by the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. How perfect, right? Education and culture, right in their name. It was perfect. It was a match made in heaven. So we started talking with the people in ECA about their program, and the program was developed in Washington, D.C. at headquarters, and then promoted throughout all of the embassies of the United States, often referred to by them as missions or posts. And the program took a blended learning approach where a particular embassy would promote a particular MOOC and then offer a facilitated discussion section by embassy staff or related people in that city. The MOOCs generally fell into one of 3 categories, or multiple categories, multiple of those 3 categories, either entrepreneurship or STEM, and that reflected the more development-oriented goals of the mission, or English language, which is more the diplomatic aspect of the mission. So MOOC camps were conducted in over 40 countries. So we framed this analysis as a case study with embedded case studies in the countries that were chosen based on their orientation towards a cultural orientation of the MOOC courses versus an educational orientation. And so we chose 6 countries, 2 for education, 2 for culture, and then 2 because of the special circumstances in which they were operating. And so those choices were vetted by the ECA staff in Washington, who also gave us the very pragmatic advice about who would be most likely to actually answer our emails. So we ended up with these 6 countries, and their relative internet penetration rates are shown here. We have a low in the DRC of 1.7% and a high in Macedonia of 63.1%. Okay, so what do we find? Again, this was qualitative research, so our findings are derived from both an inductive and deductive coding, and I'll start with the deductive analysis and the findings related to cultural and social capital. So certainly, the students who participated in this, and we certainly recognize that this is a very biased sample of students who are working with the U.S. embassies in their countries, so it's not surprising that they were anxious to have certificates issued by US universities. They were also anxious to have the certificates issued by the embassies. And so that points to a different level and type of institutionalized cultural capital. We also saw evidence of embodied cultural capital. The language capital of Bordeaux is certainly observed here as students were provided opportunities to practice their English. But we also delineated three somewhat new forms of cultural capital: learning capital, education systems capital, and global exposure capital. With language capital, we saw that, the students were able to practice their English, as shown in this quote, which I'm going to skip for time. The educational systems capital, which was an important component because I think it's something that is somewhat unique to the MOOC experience because of its ability to traverse distance. So for example, an Armenian staff member explained that yes, the students expressed ideas to be independent and to be free, somehow motivates people to learn, as many of them have been to the States or Europe to see how their classes have been held. What they were explaining here is the Armenian students' enthusiasm for learning in a class that they were able to choose themselves, because much of the curricula in Armenian universities are prescribed. And so just the idea and the concept of electives was something foreign to them and something they very much enjoyed experiencing. And so we differentiate this from learning capital, which is often focused on. So aspects of learning capital such as critical thinking, ability to process information and engage in discourse, that's one form of capital, but that educational systems capital is also important as well. We also, something that was suggested to us in our earlier study with the GIS course was the concept of global exposure capital, that students enjoyed the exposure to foreign ideas and different ways of approaching problems. One student from Belize reflected, "I wouldn't have taken the MOOC, if it was offered by a local university, because in this way, through a foreign university, we are exposed to a developed country way of thinking. It forces us to grow and develop. We are learning. So it's like we don't keep staying in the same ways of doing things. We move on, we get new ideas, our horizons and minds are broadened." Now, I'm not 100% comfortable with this quote and this thought. I think there's value in indigenous forms of knowledge and organic development, but this is their experience. This is what the students are telling us. Granted, these are a particular type of students, but it's important for us, I think, to take their experiences into account. But this global exposure capital is not a one-way street. It's not north to south. Sometimes it's south to north. Sometimes it's south-south, north-north. Students are connecting not only with the faculty in the MOOC, but with each other in peer grading experiences. One Congolese student reflected that he would like to see developed a MOOC on, for example, traditional knowledge or medicinal plants, or great apes called bonobos, where we are the only country in the world where you are finding those apes. We can develop good MOOCs that can be followed throughout the world. So there's a desire for them to also share in what are unique cultural traits and resources in their local environment. And so I think this aspect of the MOOCs, which we heard again and again, is something that needs to be considered. There were also important elements of social capital delivered in the MOOC. Ooh, okay, 2 minutes. Certainly by the students, but also at the organizational level, and this is where I think our research has implications for development organizations who might want to use MOOCs, that the State Department staff were using this MOOC camp as a way to connect with beneficiaries, to understand their needs in a deeper and richer way than just, for example, doing a survey. Through having continued interaction and interacting with them on issues like sustainable development and entrepreneurship to understand what the real needs were. Okay, so we also did an inductive analysis that focused on, or I didn't say focus on, but kind of exposed some interesting issues related to blended learning, localization, and technology. So as many of us have experienced, social media has brought us trolls, and it was interesting to see the blended learning approach as a way to ameliorate the negative effects of trolls. It also combined to help with localization, both for the content as well as being able to overcome connection challenges. And then we also have some recommendations for technology. But because of time constraints, I'm just going to get to the end here. It was interesting for us to really discover the joint diplomatic and development agendas of the State Department in this research. And certainly the role of any diplomatic mission, whether it's the government of India, the government of Singapore, or the government of the United States, to promote their own interests. But it's not an exclusive focus, and there is some development focus. And so what we can draw from this is those aspects of this research that are more related to development, but keeping in mind the bias in the sample and the bias of the program in that way. Okay, so hopefully this research has opened up, provided a more holistic view of the MOOC experience than those simply looking at how to improve completion rates. Shows MOOCs as valuable tools for maybe the middle of the pyramid audiences, and may provide some insight into the ways that MOOCs can be used by development agencies, either through education programs or just for training. Questions?
Okay, so we have time for some questions, and again, we have 2 mics there at the sides if anybody wants to come up for questions. There are also a number of roaming mics around, so just raise your hand and one of them will come to you. Okay, Bill.
Hi. Is this on? Bill Teese, Microsoft Research India. So I think this is fabulous work. I think it's potentially very influential and great to see the qualitative methods as well. I was just curious, your thoughts, kind of the interaction between, let's say, social and cultural capital and certification. Because you see, like in a lot of in-person universities, one of their biggest value propositions is all of that capital they add to their students. In fact, that's why they say still that brick and mortar colleges are better than MOOCs. There's all the networking and everything else. And so when you look at MOOCs, often if they're getting these benefits, I think they're very non-uniform. Some students choose to engage in the forum. They choose to build all those connections with other people. Is it interesting or important to think about a certificate for how much capital you built in this MOOC? Or should you actually enforce MOOCs to have those kinds of interactions between students? Or how can you strengthen the certification to reflect these benefits that are coming on a MOOC? Thanks.
Great, thanks. That's an interesting question. It depends on your audience. I mean, that's the issue with MOOCs, is the audience, the students are so heterogeneous that some are in there. And we did run into students who were only about taking the class. They didn't want to meet people. They didn't want to, all they wanted was that certificate. But they're in the same class with other people who are trying to pursue other goals. And so how to meet all those goals, or do you choose to favor some goals over others, I think is the question for MOOC designers, right? If you want to favor the traditional educational model that a MOOC is a classroom moved online and is embedded in a system of higher education in which a big part of the value is that credential that you get at the end of the day. I mean, okay, the knowledge is important too. then that would lead to particular design. And from what I see, that's the way things are headed, from my experience. But you know, I would argue that maybe that's short-sighted. And what does that, you know, we're struggling with this with online education in many fora. You know, what is the value of an online degree? I mean, it depends. I mean, we still have in our program, we have corporate associates who won't recognize an online degree. So there you go. You know, if that's the way it's going to go, maybe a focus on these other benefits is important. And I also, that local credential, right? The credential from the U.S. Embassy was very important because that carried some weight and also indicated a certain connectivity within social networks in that particular city. And so having a combined local and global, in a sense, certificate, I think is powerful. I don't know if I answered your question, hopefully.
Okay, thank you very much. My question is about the completion rate versus fee, because I used to believe that because of no fees attached to most of these courses, this could be one of the reasons why the dropout rate is high. So in your interaction with these students, do you think this has any place?
So your question is, if we had fees, would the completion rate be higher?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah. But the question is that what we want, right? Is that, I mean, there may be two different systems that we need. One where we have free courses for people who want to explore, who want informal education experiences, who don't want to complete it, right? They want to be able to go on. I know lots of people who've gone on to MOOCs and they start and it's fun, right? I mean, you get to experience it, learn some new things, and then you get busy and you drop out. So what, right? It doesn't have to be a moral thing, right? That you didn't finish a course. It's a museum, in my mind, at least that part of it.
Yeah, hi, Michael Medeo from Georgia Tech. So I'm curious, did you see any linkages, or in what ways did you see that the relationship between the students' motivation for taking the course and if that allowed them to persist through the course, or if that enabled different types of collaboration or peer mentorship among the students in the class, and whether that may have differed from country to country?
We did have an opportunity to analyze some quantitative data that the State Department collected. They did pre and post surveys for the embassy staff, and then just post surveys with the students. And I'll have to look back, but I think we found the findings for that were that the predictors of persistence were English language ability, self-reported English language ability, and there was something interesting. I think it was kind of like the connection with the instructor, right? The feedback from the instructor was really important to their persistence, which I thought was good feedback for MOOC instructors.
I'm Nova. I graduated from Georgia Tech, now teaching in Bangladesh. I have also done lots of courses in Coursera. Many of my students do it. I teach there. I'm very interested to know the qualitative side. What actually is there for the developing country students? What's the perspective? I have some perspective of my students, and I want to see what are the differences from developing countries versus underdeveloped or developing ones.
For me, I mean, I think that if we assume that developed country students are taking developed country MOOCs, which is, you know, a question, maybe they're not, they don't experience that cultural capital in educational systems. So they're just taking, you know, more of the same. And so I think it would be interesting for students to experience what it's like to take a university class in the DRC where, as the students describe, there's not a lot of interaction with the faculty member, and the nature of the exams are very different. So I think that the difference in the educational systems could potentially be an important factor there in the differences. But other than that, I think the motivations are the same in some cases. I think students, want to be that one to ace the exam on, signal processing from MIT. I mean, Americans want to do that. People from all over the world want to do that. I think we also find people in different countries taking MOOCs just for fun. So I think there's a lot of commonality also.
I have experienced several things which I would like to share.
Yeah.
One was some courses are not offered. For example, HCI courses, those are new, especially in Bangladesh. Then there were other factors like kinds of assignments. There are typical types of assignments in Bangladesh compared to, unseen assignments or totally designed type of assignments. So that will be a great place to explore. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you. No, and certainly the use of MOOC material by instructors all over the world is, of course, a benefit that has yet to be systematically explored, I think. I know that in some countries, people, universities are using them. They're also using them for like entrance exams and pre-qualifications and all kinds of interesting uses.
Okay, great. Thanks for the questions. And well, if there are any more people with questions for Carleen, you can take that up with her right after this, since we need to move on to the next speaker.